Okay. Yes. Okay, so this is going to be not the normal format for our course. We usually start by sharing something from on the origin of societies or DTD. Um, but that's not what we're going to do today. Uh, we're going to start with research. So you guys are all researchers to some degree, and some of you are dedicated researchers trying to get a PhD or professors doing research. So ever since we started to talk about metadata, I have been in a state of confusion and discomfort uh, because I'm coming to see that metadata is very important in preen theory, and it's something that I omitted consideration of pretty much entirely. Uh, Maybe a little bit I stumbled across it, but I want to understand more about it, and I hope to, you know, like Frankenstein, steal your brains, right? And well, actually, yes, that's right. Steal your brains and you help me with this, please. Okay, so we're going to consider the Hamlet soliloquy preen, which cultural preen, which I'm going to call HSP for some reason now. All right, now we knew that it was stored uh, in books, computers, and brains, right? I mean, we started with that. And Hamlet's soliloquy preen was our first cultural preen. Right? But in each case, whether we store them in computers or books or brains, there may be metadata associated with them. Yeah? Okay. And I want to look at the metadata that we end up associating with the Hamlet soliloquy preen. So let's start with uh, your computer, indicated in blue here, and you are storing the Hamlet soliloquy preen, let's say, may actually be the case. Yeah. Okay. So now, what metadata will also be stored with the Hamlet soliloquy preen in your computer? William,
Was acquired.
say it again.
The date and time it was acquired.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So I've got a little text box here. Okay. Yes, that seems right. What else?
Maybe the memory address.
The memory address. What does that mean?
If I guess you're saying it's stored in a computer, so
Yeah.
it's probably, I guess it depends like if it's stored on the hard drive or not, but it probably has like
Hmm.
a address to the memory.
Yeah. That okay. So it would reside at a person particular address. That's true. I'm a little confused on that one. So let's go on. Okay, what are other metadata will be there?
I mean, if we're assuming it's a file, it gets like an inode number and stuff, and like all the other cruft that the OS assigns it.
Well, okay. So what was that first thing you talked about?
I think it's called an inode. If we assume that it's a file, it gets like an inode number, and then that's like sort of how the OS like manages all of the file metadata. So things like when it was modified, where it lives on the hard drive. Also, I think it like, depending on what OS you're running, it breaks it into like different pages. So the inode will contain like the different indices into different page tables because it's not generally just stored in one contiguous block of memory. It's stored in as like almost like a tree. So I think the way Linux does it, you have like the first level will have like several that are at the beginning, and then like the very last item in that list of like nodes is then like your path to the next level or something like that. I don't know. It's a very convoluted structure.
Okay, so there's this, you called it
An
what?
inode, lowercase inode, inode.
Okay, and did I spell Linux right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a D, not a T.
Oh, I know, yes. Okay.
It's text. Oh,
You'll discover through this process that I can neither type nor spell. Okay, I know determines where it is stored. Now, what else?
it's text.
Sorry, Isabel?
It's text.
Well, I'm thinking that HSP sort of is in some sense it's text.
Hmm.
I don't know that I'm not sure what to do with that, right? Whether it's metadata or not.
Like
Okay.
language data, but I'm not sure if that counts as like metadata. Yeah.
Okay, so um I think there's a lot more. For example, it might also include author. It might. It might include date, received. Yes, might. Um, uh, Size, number of pages, things like that. Yes.
Permissions.
I'm sorry, what?
Permissions. Also, whether it's read,
Oh,
write, or execute. If it's a directory, which the Hamlet soliloquy preen should not be a directory, probably.
okay, yes. And I think this is important. So these sort of permissions. Okay. So it may also acquire, let's say you received it as a Word file I sent to you. You got it in an email and you hit download. Now, that Word file, to some extent, is the Hamlet soliloquy preen, you could say. But if I'd sent it to you as a pure text file, I would have sent you something different, right? So the object itself seems to come with some metadata. For example, if I send it to you with a .duc associated with it, document ending, you know what I mean by point, DUC, point doc. Okay, I think I'm making sense. Okay.
Is that
If
DOC?
yes, that's it.
Okay.
Deals.
I'm not familiar with a dot duck.
Okay, good. Thank you for speaking up. .doc. That's metadata. If I sent it as txt.txt, that's also metadata, right? But that data, we could say, was intrinsic to the copy I sent you. That is, once it got there, the computer may have done this inode thing and figured out where it's going to store it and then attach that to the document. So there's both a seemingly intrinsic metadata that comes with the object from the outside, and then metadata that may be added on by the operating system, say. Yeah. Now, why is the metadata, for example, whether it's .doc or .txt, why does it matter?
It changes how it's treated. So for example, if it's a .doc, it may open only in like Word. So if you try to open it, it won't open in like a video player, probably, for example.
Yes. So the metadata is not just static stuff like, the number of pages. Sometimes it's actually data that causes a program to start running and processing what you got sent. Yes? Okay, so yes, let's see. Mhm. Okay, and these are interesting metadata to me because these are sending the document to be processed by a program that was intrinsic to the machine you had, right? And if I stored Hamlet's soliloquy uh, preen on a Mac, it might have an ending that opened the pages uh, program, yes, to process it. And also, as Ryan has pointed out, there are these permissions, right? It may be a read-only document, yes. That may be intrinsic to the document I sent you, or it may be that some like security program, once it's received, puts that metadata on it. Okay. So these are some examples of what metadata does inside computers, right? Now, what if the blue dot here is you and you get the Hamlet soliloquy preen? So this is sort of, if it's stored in a computer, what happens, or what its metadata is, and we see it. It can even include running programs and things like that. What about you? So what if it gets stored in a person? Then what can we say about the Hamlet soliloquy preen? What's its metadata then? Well, as you know, I really like it when someone will engage
Oh, I
in a
had,
discussion.
okay. Sorry, I had
Well,
my hand
Ryan.
raised.
Oh, my bad.
No
Okay,
worries.
got it.
I wanted to give other
Ryan.
people a chance to say things.
Sure.
I was going to say, kind of related to a comment I made a while back in a previous lecture. this sort of depends on the kind of like preen, but like there's like a trust value associated with it, but I think that varies. So for something like the Hamlet soliloquy preen, I guess the trust might be like, was this correctly the original versus like maybe I'm misquoting it because it was like from a translation or it was like a film adaptation or something. So I guess there could still be sort of a trust, but you should also probably associate like a source.
Actually, the earliest version we have of Hamlet's soliloquy does not begin with "to be or not to be." That is the question. I'm going to find out what it is and let you know. Let's see. Um, Earliest version of Hamlet's soliloquy. Let's see.
Chubing in the chat said memory.
I'm sorry, Isabel. What?
Chubing on in the chat said memory as a metadata.
Oh, wait. Okay, you're answering. All right. I wanted to take care of the
Oh,
point
I'm
that
sorry.
Ryan made. Sorry.
Mhm.
And it's and the earliest version. No wonder. Earliest. Okay. Well, this is not working as well as I wanted. It's really a pathetic thing that has no drama at all in it. It's something like to be or not to be. It's an important question. Some lousy thing like that. Anyway, okay, so but uh, you're remarking that the metadata that your version may have inside of you may have this associated uncertainty about what was really written. Okay. All right, Nathan, please.
So this kind of draws from the idea of psychology, where it's like kind of mood dependent memory, right? So in addition to maybe roughly date and time, you might also have a metadata of the kind of mood, whether you're angry, whether you were, really feeling what kind of emotion you were when you acquired that dream. Maybe you were scared. Sorry, maybe you were really scared because you started reading out the Hamlet soliloquy screen when, you released the lion into our house.
Yes. Now, I think that that can happen. And more generally, I think you can have associations with it that are emotional. So, for example,
Mhm.
if we take this, let's say it was a quote from Marx, religion is the opiate of the people, or something like that. Uh, I suspect that, particularly if you're highly religious, you have an emotional response to that, and that is linked to that, let's call it the Marx cultural preen. Yes. But of course, if you were in a communist country that still was at least somewhat communist, uh, or near the early state, you would have had a positive response to that, perhaps, right? So your emotions seem to be some metadata that gets attached, yes?
Right. Yeah.
And I would say that in the case of Hamlet's soliloquy preen, whatever you got it from came with some emotional attachment, or at least some intellectual attachment. For example, since probably most of us encountered it in school, there was a sort of implicit, this is good stuff, metadata that came with it. Yes. Whereas we would have got, this is bad stuff, metadata associated with the marks, cultural-prene. Yeah. So, okay, so that's what I think, that it's too narrow a point of view to look at an object that's storing a preen, cultural preen, for example, that it's just storing that preen. When we look at it from the individual that has that preen, be it a cell, a computer, or a person, then the view can be very different depending on the person. It's still, I think, the cultural preen, the Hamlet soliloquy preen, for example. But this metadata that comes with it can have a huge impact on your emotional response to it, lots of other views of it, and that just like the point doc can cause a program to run. Is it the case that, for example, when you picked up the democracy cultural preen, did that have how did that cause action? I gave the example that when the US entered World War I, the presidents said, this is we're going to war to save the world make the world safe for democracy. And those who had the democracy cultural preen took action, probably, or at least a good portion of them. And they took action, for example, by joining the army. Yeah. And so why did that action happen? Is that like because there was a point doc at the end and it caused a certain program to run? Can you guys work your way through that kind of thing? Ryan?
It reminds me a lot of like some kind of terminate and stay resident program that like almost like a virus that only actually does something when it's triggered and just sort of it stays like asleep otherwise.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, that's a good point. The word used in biology is sometimes, I guess, quiescent. So, for example, HIV is a virus that famously exploits that. It that it gets, if a person gets infected with HIV, then HIV is clever enough to insert a copy of its own genome into the genome of the cell that it's in. And even if the virus is killed, all copies of the virus can be killed, but there's still this genome of the virus that's now part of the genome of the person, or at least those cells that got infected. And it's thought, or at least it was thought, that when those cells start to divide, if they ever do, then HIV is sort of bursts out again and new viruses are created and everything else. And that's why the idea of curing HIV is not currently within our abilities, it seems, to because it can stay there for years and then just burst out. Okay, yes. Was there another? Oh, okay. Ah, John?
Yeah, yes, Professor. Just a quick question, if I may. Why, why did you start wondering about metadata independently as opposed to just other preens that happen to be related to some preen? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'm confused about that as well. So let's take, for example, when the Hamlet soliloquy preen is stored in your computer and it has the metadata that it's, 3 pages. That means. Okay. Now, that metadata resides in the memory of the computer. Yes? I mean, it's somewhere. But is the metadata itself a preen? I would say it's probably not. I don't know. What do you think? Ryan?
I was actually about to put in the chat. I think the strategy that you use to determine what metadata that you do store for a given preen would be a preen. So, like, for example, the OS that you're running determines what metadata, or at least the format of the metadata for each file. Similarly, we've all heard, like, don't trust what you hear or see on the internet. If you haven't ever heard that, maybe you don't consider things on the internet to be of different validity than other things.
Okay. Okay. So you put metadata on dependent on things
So, like, your
you yeah.
metadata strategy, I guess, would be a preen. Like what
Uh,
what you choose to store with any, like, as a function of preen in, I have a preen that says I'm going to attach these things to it as metadata. That whole action, that whole function would be like a preen.
yeah, maybe. But I'm not sure I can even see that clearly. In fact, I'm pretty sure I can't. John?
Yes, so I'm going to go into risky speculation territory, if I may. But I was thinking, uh, I was reading parts of DTD, and I think that, you know, it's common that some preens depend on other preens, in the sense that, you know, life is a good example. Our genes depend on there being uh, nature, and there depends on there being plants and animals.
Yes.
Like, this is how we feed, right? And
Yes.
at the same time, we are in a sense made from our genes, right? But we
Yes.
ourselves are also physical bodies, which means
Yes.
we can be hosts to other preens, right?
Absolutely we are. Yes.
So so there is so one, there is a sort of a path dependency, in a sense that what comes before, you know, the things that come after, they depend on the what has come before, which
Yes.
constitutes some sort of environment. And I don't see that metadata is that different from this, because, you know, some preens are specific to certain physical objects. So, I mean, in a way that the preens that we have, our cultural preens, we can store them on a computer, but there's the computer is different from us as a physical object. So I, I don't see why there should be an equivalence between the metadata between that the computer has about these preens and that we have about the preens.
Well,
but this doesn't mean that they can't be preens as well.
it doesn't mean that, except for two things that occurred to me. Now, maybe there's a way of reconciling this. We have sort of two definitions of what a preen is. And the first one, less formal, was it's a unit of information, which admittedly has no meaning, but that can be stored in physical things. Yes? Now, this metadata, for example, the number of bytes that Hamlet's soliloquy is taking on your computer, is that an example of the storage of some preen? Is because if it's a preen, then I guess every two computers that happen to have a file of the same type are storing it. I mean, the same size. And it's just
Yes,
getting,
yeah, I think what Ryan said about the strategy makes sense because any two humans that know that how to encode .txt files and how to decode them, they will be able to access the same Hamlet soliloquy preen, provided that the file content is exactly the same.
yeah,
Um, you know, so I guess the computer's embodiment of that information is dependent on how humans designed it and their
yeah.
understanding of.
But should we make a distinction between the computer and the data, right? I mean, we're getting really computer sciencey here, but that's probably brains or computers, and probably far more sophisticated than we can, possibly understand at this moment. Um, and I think much more complicated and sophisticated than our current best computers are. But um, but should we take the computer and other hardware, which is, I would say, are like, muscles and things like that, as being distinct from data that's stored in the memory devices, or that's hardwired into the uh, computer, by which I mean like the operating system. You're probably born with it. I don't know if it's actually stored in memory in or is it just sort of in the wiring? It doesn't seem important to me to discern the difference. But once you have all these computers in the world, and we have, you know, silicon kinds, and we have human brain kinds, and I think we have cells, which are also molecular computers. Uh, aren't they the things that have memories and which preens move around in and cause changes in behavior as they move around? So, I may seem confused to you, but that's only because I am. So, where do we draw these
There,
lines? Yeah.
I think there is an Irish saying that goes something like, "If you're not confused, then you don't know anything." So I'm
Yes.
I'm I'm confused as well. I think
Oh, good. Good. Join me.
there's an
Join me.
example. So I think Linux and Unix generally is a good example. Operating systems competed and evolved, and they have replicated into other physical bodies, and we humans have been part of this evolutionary process. We have been part of the selection of, so, and even programming languages. There was a time when Lisp was supposed to be this perfect programming language, but in the end, C ended up being used for a really long time,
Absolutely.
supposedly because it has virus-like properties. But we humans were part of this, of the selection of
Yeah,
of the evolution in these technologies. So
we
I don't
were.
know. I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but I just thought these are also examples that are worth mentioning.
Pieces of the puzzle, little points of light, which hopefully we can connect together and suddenly see a big bright light, right? Sometimes it happens, most times it doesn't. But okay, but I still want to say that there's all these computational devices, which I include our computers, our brains, the brains of other living things, and I all the way down to cells, our computing devices. And that it's the data you give them that determines their behavior. So uh, and that what we're tracking is the data, that is the information, the preen, that is can be stored in one place and on one computational device and moved in some cases to another computational device, and that impacts the behavior. And then evolution, I guess, is um, the selection by natural selection of the behavior that works. But I am still inclined to see a distinction between those things. And so when we get to this metadata, it's certainly stored in computers. It can certainly impact the way the computer works, uh, the metadata. Uh, but is it a preen? Um, I don't know. That's a tough one. And if we admit that that can be a preen, then where does it stop? You know, if there's 2,460 bytes and that's a preen, does every number become a preen? We're supposed to be okay. Now, it's not surprising to go down such a rabbit hole. Yes, that's going to happen, and uh, I don't think we ever have a complete understanding of things. But what we're trying to do is distill out of the morass, this boiling cauldron of all this stuff going on, some things that we can pin our hat, uh, take as this is an underlying principle that in a sort of compact form is explaining what's going on, not in detail, but just as process.
Professor,
So,
how?
yeah.
Sorry, just one last speculation from my part. How about how would you think about if we viewed the difference between DOC and TXT as strategies for the preens to survive? So maybe
Oh,
Microsoft Word becomes extinct as an application, and the ones that chose TXT may survive longer.
that's a very good point. So I think in the terms I'm trying to see this now, what you're saying is uh, if stored as a .doc, then it may reproduce more readily than if stored as a .txt. So, okay, so Hamlet's soliloquy stored as a .doc is going to spread through email, whatever it is, differently than a .txt. Now, my intuition is that while .txt is probably more universally useful, no matter what computer this document ends up in, it's just the case that, at least right now, the .doc is probably a better package for so in that case, the Hamlet soliloquy preen has intrinsic metadata, the .doc or the .txt, which is added on and does in fact highly impact what the metadata is, does impact how well it spreads in that form, right, with that metadata. So that's a good point, even though I sort of messed it all up when I started to talk about it. But I think there's a good point there, John. Nathan?
I guess this is kind of building off of John's point, and I'm not entirely sure that this would count as metadata, but I was thinking of smallpox because that preen lives in DNA and in a computer.
Yes.
So for the smallpox preen, the computer stored version is a very bad strategy for it to replicate.
Yes.
And the metadata of the sugars and the phosphates and RNA that exist if it's stored in the physical molecule will allow it to wreak havoc on humanity for thousands of years.
Yes. So and being stored as, an actual molecule or as a molecule of DNA inside of a virus was a very good way for thousands of years for this genome to get around. But then it wasn't. Okay. Vaccines, took it out. And but then the value of that copy that was stored in a computer suddenly became, to a large extent, the last copies around. Yes. And so then it showed its value because now we realize that we have the technology, perhaps, I hope nobody's ever done this, to recreate it from the computer sequence. Yes, the actual virus we can make. So, yes, it's a good example of what appears to be a very bad way to get reproduced, put it in a computer for the smallpox genome, or much less good than the virus itself running wild in the wild. Yeah, I buy what you're saying, and it's a good example of that. Okay, so let's any more comments about this? This has been very helpful. It seems to me that the next time I write a draft of this book, I'm going to include something on metadata that is like what we're discussing. This is not the whole topic of what's going on in preen land is not something we're going to be able to sort out. But I am still left with the impression that metadata is showing another level of what's happening that is worth knowing. Okay, So any other comments? All right.
Yes, I have
John?
one last point of view, which so maybe Hamlet's soliloquy spring as DOC is almost in a different host than Hamlet's soliloquy print and TXT. And so the computer as a physical thing might have these it might have two bodies, two virtual bodies. One is word applications, the other one is text editors.
Yeah.
But then that will take us away from the physical objects embodiment of prints, because the same physical body might have these two sort of virtual bodies inside.
I think that's what I also see in this metadata, that having a point doc version inside of a Windows program is going to behave differently and get reproduced differently than having it a point doc inside of, for example, a Mac, because I assume that there's Mac users who never download Word, whatever it is, yeah, and use Pages. So yes, its destiny is very different. And so I want to see that as the Hamlet soliloquy preen has intrinsic metadata that it carries with it from machine, not one that's necessarily added once it gets on a machine. So the point doc, for example. Okay. And that has an immense amount to do with how well the Hamlet soliloquy will be replicated in that form. Yeah. Okay, so thank you guys. If you have more ideas about this, or if you straighten all this out, please let me know or write your own book. Okay. So, okay, well, we're coming up on the break. And so let's start sharing. And oh, I guess I'm already sharing. Oh, okay, hang on. Oh, I am. Okay, thank you again for that discussion. It was helpful. Okay, so now we had discussed last time language, and I wanted to make further remarks on it. I had expressed the idea that I suspect that language was almost entirely a tool of the conscious part of our brains. And I'd gone further to suggest that the conscious part of our brains arose entirely for social reasons, and that the entire purpose of language was to communicate with others. But I want to amend that, because by talking with others, I most recently, Professor Kempe has caused me to think that I might be wrong, and that the conscious part of our brains uh, are also involved in other endeavors. For example, in determining what to wear based on the weather forecast. That may be something that's processed in the conscious part of our brain, and it may use language. Okay, so I guess I'm expressing more confusion. Isabel.
So also, because like we were also talking last time about how language like might be a more conscious thing, and part of it was that like people raised by wolves or like other people who don't have like language skills exist. Actually, there are clinical studies, like multiple clinical studies that show that if you deprive people of languages, they also lack like a large part of their brain that does reasoning. So, like empirically, clinically speaking, there's some connection between reasoning and language.
Okay, wait. Did I understand you to say that if people are deprived of language,
Mhm.
that their brains are physically different?
Yeah.
Oh, in what way?
Like parts of their brain that is usually associated with like reasoning are much less developed and smaller.
Okay, so hold on. Uh, Here's what I can imagine, but I'd like you to clarify this for me. Um, there's two possibilities. One is, among many others, one is they looked at these people having injected them with some, radio opaque stuff, or maybe it was this kind of where you look at PET scans, where you can see the amount of sugar being used in various areas of the brain that lights up. And I can imagine that in someone who's learned language, there's a part of the brain that when they reason lights up quite a lot under certain circumstances. But when they haven't learned language, the claim is under the similar circumstances, not much lights up there. Now that I can imagine, but that the brain would physically get smaller, that
I think somebody said that to me recently. So I mean that I did not see the paper on, but
Mhm.
somebody did say that to me. Like physically, also your brain looks different than. I mean, this is like an unethical experiment, so like it's not a replicable experiment. Like, but
Yeah, yes, you're right.
yeah.
You're right. Yes, you're right. You're right.
But people who's been never who were never able to acquire language, their brain structure in general looks very different. Like especially with respect to reasoning and like logic.
Okay, so um I'd be interested if you have a reference,
Well,
please.
I'll make Jesse Jesse send it to me. Jesse Thomason, another professor from NLP.
Oh, okay. Okay, that'd be good. Um yes, and uh yeah, I'd be interested in the methodology used. Okay, but does that tell us anything about language? Um,
I think it
uh,
said something about like reasoning and like how the way people gravitate towards reasoning is like very deeply, possibly a little bit naturally associated with language.
okay. I think that our discussion really helped me on this metadata thing. And so thank you. And I think I'm about to write a new chapter for the book as a result. Maybe I'll write it and we can discuss it. Okay. But let's turn to the more less confusing parts of things, and we'll begin to read uh, this.
A person's cultural meme set. Now that you have some cultural memes stored in your brain, what do they do there? A lot. They will have an immense impact on your physical behavior and emotions. Consider
Okay. Yeah. All right. Sorry.
Consider a professional soldier. The soldier's cultural meme set will have specialized cultural prenes from their nation's cultural prene set that most other members do not have in theirs. The soldier may come to store what I'll call the valor cultural prene, that under some circumstances it is honorable to make sacrifices for your fellow soldiers or members of your national society. A soldier who stores the valor cultural meme, and strongly believes it, may now be programmed for the ultimate sacrifice in the future. If a soldier's cultural memes can lead to their death, what have your cultural memes led you to do?
Okay, so that is an important question. So this professional soldier will acquire some of the cultural preens of the society he's in, but almost certainly not all of them. And the ones he or she acquires are going to have a big impact on their behavior. So, and in this particular case, a soldier could pick up the valor cultural preen, and it can lead to their death. So, and that raises the question, we've all picked up all these cultural preens. What do they lead us to do? Yes. And I would say a whole lot. In fact, yes, a lot. Okay, and this example, I think, illustrates certain things.
This example illustrates what members are to a society's cultural preens. Your society will have some degree of control over many instruments such as people, whether members or not, weapons, buildings, money, and natural resources. The cultural prene set will use these instruments, as best it can, to aid in the survival of important cultural preens, even if this results in the destruction or degradation of those instruments. As an aside, let's take a closer look at prene sets. Every prene is selfish, see
Sorry.
Dawkins, 1976, DTD, The Selfish Prene.
Okay, so we have this professional soldier, and we've asked, what do your cultural preens lead you to do? And among the answers I would suggest are, it might lead you to vote for one party rather than another party. Okay, and more. Okay, but it also shows us what a society's cultural preens think of us. That is, I think it's correct to say that the society you belong to has control over many instruments. It can control money, it can control weapons, it can control members of the society, and it can control non-members of the society to some extent. Yes? These are all just resources that are available to the cultural preens of your society to use as best they can. And they're going to use them to keep themselves alive. And these resources are expendable. They will almost certainly have to spend some of those resources to reproduce themselves and the like, right? And they're going to develop evolutionary strategies that use these resources as best they can. So that means they're willing to get rid of you or some money or do various other things to help their ability to survive. What think you on that? Is that acceptable? I mean, I don't think that's much the way we want to think of ourselves, right? And I'm not saying these other ways of thinking of yourself are wrong. They're just different views of what your function is in the world, yes, and what you're all about. So this again, we have many humanistic, human kind of views of what we're here for, what we do. But the preen theoretic point of view says you're sort of no different than a handful of cash that's available to your society. Okay. Mhm. All right, so continuing.
Let's take a closer look at preen sets. Every preen is selfish. See Dawkins, 1976, DTD, The Selfish Preen. So, a preen set is a collection of selfish individuals. For example, the set of all the preens you store, including cultural memes, experiential memes, created memes, genetic preens, is a collection of aspiring dictators, each of which wants to exploit you for its own survival.
Okay. This, as Dawkins pointed out, and which I reiterate in a broader context, your preens are trying to survive, and they are selfish. That is, they don't care about you, but in addition, they don't care about other preens. So there's a thing in physics which is called I forget what it's called, but quarks are never seen by themselves. Yes. You'd never get a quark just by itself. It's always paired with other kinds of quarks to form protons, neutrons, and stuff. Okay. It isn't quite that strict with cultural preens or preens in general, but something like that is largely true. Objects, particularly objects of importance like computers, humans, cells, things like that, don't store typically just one preen. It's very unusual. Rather, they store lots and lots of preens. And so your genes, I think it's best to look at, is a set of preens. And each one is on its own destiny, evolutionarily, the destiny being to try to keep its copy numbers up. And and you're a resource that they are going to use to try to accomplish that. And if they can gain more control over you than another, say, genetic preen that's stored in you, then and cause that genetic preen's survival prospects to diminish, it's not their concern. They just want to get themselves. Okay, so in particular, your preens are not a team. If a subset of them can get more of your resources by forcing the rest to get less, they will do so, quote, without the slightest remorse. They don't care. And this causes no end to the difficulty of human existence and the complexity of societies. All right. So,
Can the memes you store be logically inconsistent? There is no requirement.
can they be logically inconsistent? That is, within your own brain, do you have logically inconsistent Cultural-prenes. And Nathan?
I was
Nathan
meaning to
Dahaki.
bring this up when we were talking about truth, I think like a couple Wednesdays ago. And you said that a cultural preset could be logically inconsistent. But if we defined truth as subjective, how would we objectively define logical consistency?
Good question, and there's really no problem here. Logical inconsistency is a concept that is available in the Society of Mathematicians. And what I am referring to is within that society, would they declare that some of your memes are logically inconsistent? Yes? And right. So the and I would say that the answer is even in your own head, you have logically inconsistent memes. And the example that I let's see, do I get into this example? I probably do. So let me see. I'll hold off. Okay. Still trying to figure out whether. Okay, so let me give you an example. If you grew up in a religious society, and then you were exposed to a secular society, for example, a university, might you not get anti-capital punishment memes from, say, the religious society, and later get pro-capital punishment preens from the secular society? I'm not saying everybody does this, but I would say a good portion of people do this and do acquire anti capital punishment and pro capital punishment memes. Right. So most of us, I think, could easily argue both sides of that issue. Okay. And so we have both in our brains, and those are not logically consistent according to mathematics. Yes? Did that work for you, Nathan Dahaki?
No, I still feel like because none
Huh?
of this is well defined mathematically.
Well,
So,
okay.
like for example, would like let's say you have a preen saying murder is bad at all times, or a meme saying murder is
Mhm.
bad at all times, and then another meme saying I should kill someone else in self-defense.
Yes.
I guess like that would be a contradiction, but I guess perhaps you could I don't see a way to like define everything mathematically. Maybe that you could, but
You raise a very good point. And all right, so let me ask you this. By your level of education, you know first order logic, right? Uh, However, there was before that, uh, what was it called? Propositional logic, I guess it might have been called. And it says things like, does it make sense? Does the following argument make sense? All cats have whiskers. My father has whiskers, therefore my father is a cat. Right. Well, this is all truth table stuff. Okay. Now, if we include that mathematics still has this kind of thing, then I think in propositional logic, it doesn't matter what the words mean, whiskers, cats. It just means the structure of that argument was inconsistent. So in that sense, can we say that, let's take the I'm against capital punishment, for capital punishment is logically inconsistent? Maybe. All right. But I don't think I'm gonna worry about pinning that down exactly. Okay. So Kushal, Khalid Indi. Khalid Indi.
Hi, yes. I think even if even if there are logically inconsistent preens, so maybe uh there could be two preens in us. One of them is saying all murder is bad, and the other one saying that uh murders all are acceptable in cases of self-defense.
Yes.
But um in I think like you said, like some versions of logic are stronger and more consistent with it's like I guess if our brain is an operating system, it is able to deduce that one of those one of those preens makes more logical sense than the other one, given our
Oh,
existing morality. Because that's what propositional logic operates on, right? Operates on it operates on assumptions and
not.
how those assumptions tie to
Please
conclusions.
go.
So if we have an assumption that um if you make an assumption that life is meaningful and your life has no any more meaning than somebody else, then you could logically go down that path and decide that murder in self-defense is not or I guess is permissible. And you might
Yeah. Oh,
in that
please
sense,
go
like
on.
the preen that all murder is just bad might decay in that environment where you can make that logical conclusion.
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying, and I think you're getting it, Kushal. Um, I would view the situation you just talked about, of you have this moral context, as you have a bunch of cultural preens that you've acquired. That's your moral context. Those are your axioms. And what you're saying is uh, killing, uh, all killing is bad, or killing is okay in self-defense. One of the, given both those two, they will not be consistent with your moral uh, preens. They won't both be consistent.
Yes.
Yes. And so that's my point. You will have inconsistent memes in your head. You have the moral foundation, which is just basically a bunch of memes that you've acquired. And you have certain other things, and you want to see if they're consistent with your moral foundation. And I guess in one, depending on the moral foundation, you'll find one or the other of those. It's okay to kill in self-defense. It's not okay to kill in self-defense. Will be inconsistent with them. But in either case, you're going to have inconsistent memes in your head.
Yes. I guess
Okay.
yeah,
Mhm.
I guess yeah, I think yeah, I think you'll have these memes in your head and I think it's just more like you'll find one of those or memes um has an effect more consistently has an effect on your judgment than another preen. So if
Oh,
somebody asks you about your opinion on capital punishment or abortion or something,
mhm.
um you might have conflicting memes in your head. It's just that since those memes are also competing within you, that's at least that's how I'm interpreting that right now.
I I think you're doing a very good job of it. Yes, but notice that those two memes, uh, it's okay to kill in self-defense. It's not okay to kill in self-defense, or both in your maybe both in your head. Uh, and and if hopefully never you're in a situation where that becomes an actual issue, I would claim that you are probably going to have a battle between those two memes that you have in your head and
Yeah.
decide whether you're going to get a gun and shoot somebody who, say, invades your house, or decide you're going to lock your door and not do anything or call the 911, right? Or even have a gun in your house.
Right.
That's going to be something that is going to be a conflict in your brain, because one set of memes is dictating one behavior, another set of memes or another meme is dictating an alternative behavior.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. We good?
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that.
My pleasure. Okay. So, yes. Okay. So since we have contradictory preens in our head, uh, okay, I'm a bit Zoom confused now. Okay, since we have these things in our heads, how do they get resolved? That is, if somebody breaks into your house, your behavior, two different memes are trying to dictate your behavior. Who, how do we resolve that? How do you deal with that? So maybe I'm probably being unclear. What I'm basically saying is that your genes designed your brain, your genetic prints. Okay. And its operating system. You had those when you were born. Okay. It would be a really lousy operating system and a lousy brain, given that we got that far, if there wasn't some mechanism to resolve these conflicts in behavior. Because you don't get to break up the world and have, a multiverse where you both kill in self-defense and you don't. Yes? You only get to have one behavior, multiverse aside. Yes? And so it seems to me incumbent upon the operating system to have some mechanism to resolve those things when behavior is called for. And so I'm going to assume that such exists, and I'll call it the Preens legislature, for want of a better word, whose job it is to sort of figure out how you should behave when you have these contradictions going on in your brain. Okay. So to read a little more.
Recall that your genetic preens designed your brain and its operating system. It seems tenable that this operating system includes what I'll call a preens legislature that mediates the preen fights to control behavior. When you are confronted with the choice of several behaviors, each of your preens can argue in the legislature for the behavior that serves it, not you, best. The preens legislature will, in the time allowed before action is required, hammer out a behavior that you will actually enact. During the deliberations, you may experience unpleasant cognitive dissonance. When a major issue is involved, your preens may be at loggerheads, and this dissonance may last for days, disrupt sleep, and make it difficult to concentrate on other issues. Once the behavior you will enact has been hammered out, you may perceive that you have made your decision. CDTD, The War Within. Lenote, what are emotions? Why do we have them? Key bono?
I think that was all right. So this sort of brings us to this example that we had earlier of the of Joan of Arc, right? Do you guys remember that, or should we recall it? I'm going to recall it because I got it here, and then we'll discuss it. I'm having Zoom problems, so let's see. Okay, so let's recall what happened at Joan of Arc. Or let's not, because I don't know what's going on. All right, so Joan of Arc. She is a French maiden, which means a virgin, a young woman. And she has visions of that involve France, God, and Catholicism. And at a very young age, this is all happening in the 1300s. At a very young age, she starts to somehow lead armies of France in their base at that time, never-ending battles with England. And she scores some major successes. And then she ends up getting captured by the English. And she's given the option of getting burned at the stake or recanting. That is saying, oh, those visions, I think I was, didn't get enough sleep or whatever. Yes? All right. So she has, in my opinion, some real serious life or death conflicts between on which her preens have very different opinions. That is, her genes, what do her genes want her to do? Well, if you know, just, I'm sorry, Nathan, yeah, what?
Her genes want her to live, so probably recanting is a better option for her genes.
Exactly. What do her cultural preens tell her to do? She has all these religious things that she's picked up. We could get into how she picked them up, but she's got them, right? So how can she best serve, her culture? Well, she can become a martyr. Yes? Because if she becomes a martyr, then she will cause others to join her quest. She will uh, uh, become a hero of the Catholicism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Martyrdom is a thing, right? Uh, all of the, I guess, Christ's apostles ended up martyrs, and people wrote books about them. And yes, so martyrdom is an option. Those two don't play well together. stay alive or get burned at the stake. You can't do them both. Big conflict. So how does it get resolved? Well, it gets resolved by whatever this Preens legislature is all about, whatever mechanisms have been built into us to resolve such issues. And during that resolution, I think that Joan was probably not very happy, right? Presented with those options about which she would have contradictory views. All right. In fact, I think she was probably highly distressed by that situation. In the end, what prevailed in this Preen conflict within her? What actual behavior did she execute? You guys know? Okay. She recanted.
Martyr?
She recanted. No, Caleb, she didn't. Well, yes and no. She recanted. But the English said, well, let's burn her at the stake anyway. And so she did become a martyr. And of course, she's, had hundreds of years of contributing to the growth of Catholicism and in France, right? Big martyr. All right, so that's just an example of the conflicts that get resolved. All right, so where, if anywhere, are we? Okay. Any comments? All right, so let's go on. All right, let's try here. Now, this is, I think, an interesting thing.
Cultural prenes and emotions. Genetic prenes have long used reward/punishment systems to control the behavior of their organisms. Typically, in humans the rewards are physical pleasures, and the punishments are physical discomforts.
You buy that? Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, clear. Huh?
Not
Yes.
not entirely. I think like
Ah.
dopamine probably plays a role, and I wouldn't really consider that to be like a physical pleasure.
Well, I guess dopamine might well play a role. I don't doubt that. But dopamine apparently is the mechanism by which you experience pleasure, pleasant emotions, or no, not play. You experience pleasure. The obvious setting would be, sexual pleasure. But you also get punishments. The obvious example would be putting your hand in fire, I guess, causes physical discomfort. And of course, that may be mediated by brain chemicals. I don't know, but it seems quite likely. But I think that you have an emotional reaction, not an emotional reaction. You feel those things, physical pleasure and physical discomfort. And we're designed to seek out the pleasure, get more of that, and we're designed to avoid the discomforts. And that's a way that even though we're born and we're autonomous, that much is built into us. And so it's used to control our behavior. That's my claim. Okay. So, all right. Now, the question arises, do memes, and in particular cultural memes, have a reward punishment system to control human behavior as well. Do they? And I'm going to posit here that they do, and that it appears, and that the rewards are pleasant emotions and the punishments are unpleasant emotions. Those are the controls used by cultural-prenes to control our behavior. That is, when we do things that our culture doesn't like, let's say, or witness things that our culture is not succeeding in, losing wars, for example, that we will experience emotional discomfort. Okay. And that when the opposite happens, we'll experience pleasant emotions, rewards. All right. So we'll pick up here next time. Sorry for all of the confusions, but it actually helped me. So I appreciate that. Thank you. And I guess I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.